My name's Linda Ray and I'm the CEO of NeuroCapability, and I'm on a mission to change the world one brain at a time. And one of the ways that we do that is by providing these free webinars, which we're doing monthly now. We were doing them fortnightly during COVID, but scaled back to once a month. So if you haven't seen our webinars, you can go onto our website and look at our blog, and there's a webinar section. You'll see a bunch of free webinars. I'm joined by Penny Kerno, who has just stepped into our Chief Operations Officer role. And she's going to be my co-host, or my co-pilot, I guess, and we'll be monitoring the chat pane. So if you've got any questions, or even if it's just a comment, please pop it in the chat pane, and we'll try and get to it during the time. We'll go till 45 minutes. And if you wish to stay on the call after that, then that would be great. We're happy to, if you can get a question answered or you just want to have a chat, we'll stay on the call till 1 o'clock. So thanks for joining me, and let's get into the topic. So in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the problem with KPIs and maybe suggesting some alternate ways that we can deal with, still wanting to pursue goals, but how can we do it in a different way? And obviously, I always look at things through a neuroscience lens and through a brain-friendly lens. So you love certainty. I'm just going to give you a really quick rundown of what I'm going to cover in this webinar. I'm going to look at why smart goal setting doesn't work. And I'll be curious. I'm going to ask a question in a moment about how many people are still using smart goal setting framework. Now I'm going to talk about why we need goals. Goals are important, and I'm not suggesting throw goals out. We actually do need goals in order to just moved on one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of goal setting versus goal pursuit. And finally, I'm going to talk about a framework that we've come up with at NeuroCapability that we think is an alternative to the traditional KPIs. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to start with a bit of a story. And you can see in this image a car, and this is what's called a Pinto. And in the late 1960s, Ford was losing market share to foreign competitors who were selling, smaller, fuel-efficient cars. And so the CEO at the time, he set a goal of producing a new car that would weigh under 2,000 pounds, because obviously they were using pounds at that point, and cost under $2,000. And he wanted it to be available for purchase in 1970. So that was a pretty big goal. And so this was the car that they developed, the Ford Pinto. So that tight time frame meant that senior managers were not as rigorous as they might be in doing all the safety checks with the car. And unfortunately, they built this car with the fuel tank located behind the rear axle, and it was in less than 10 inches of crush space. And this meant that the car, if it smashed into something, ignite upon impact. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. As many as 53 people died, and many other people were injured. So the goal was met, but it was met at the expense of safety, ethical behaviour, and ultimately the company's reputation really suffered badly from that as well. So I guess I wanted to tell that story because I think it's really links with this whole idea of goal setting and KPIs. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with SMART. It's a concept that has been around for 40 years now. And it's been used to kind of set goals and measure progress toward the meeting of those goals. And so it's really specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So I just want to, in the chat pane, I just want to do a quick question to you all, and you just have to type Y or N, yes or no. Is your company currently using SMART goals as a goal-setting framework? So I'm just curious. I might get you to just do that very quickly, and maybe Penny, you can do a little bit of a tally for me.
Sure can. Goodness me.
Are we getting more yeses than no?
No.
No. Fantastic. Okay, so if you're not using this, it's going to be really nice to hear what you are using in place of this. And so, as I said, this was a framework that was developed 40 years ago, and I still hear a lot of companies using it. And I was speaking at a conference probably a couple of years ago, and I interviewed Jason Fox, who was also speaking at this conference. And he used to teach SMART, and then he learned all about motivation, and he ditched it. And so, he had a lot of critiques of it and criticisms of it, as do a growing number of commentators. And it was funny, he was telling me this story where he was presenting to a big bank, and they had a session before he came in, and he wasn't allowed to be part of that because it was where they were sharing, corporate strategy, etc. And apparently they did a great big presentation on SMART and their SMART goals for the company. And then he came in and he bagged SMART, and there was this deathly silence, and he didn't know what he'd done wrong until he found after they just spent all of this time talking about SMART, and then he came in and talked about all the problems with. And I think the story of the Pinto car is a really good example where, they goal, they, had it was time bound, and, they had some kind of criteria for it. But he kind of asked the question, there was a really important criteria, which was around safety, that was missing in that goal process, and it had really devastating consequences. So I guess one of my question to you all is, how useful is the current way that we're approaching goal setting and setting KPIs, especially given the research that shows we often don't meet goals? And we know that the research also suggests that in many organisations that are setting stretch targets, only 10% of employees actually reach these stretch targets. And we also know that organisations that are linking bonuses with performance, we'll also see people lying about their reporting in order to make sure that they get their bonus. So I guess what we're seeing is a bunch of commentators saying maybe this is not the best approach. And there's a really lovely paper, and it's called Goals, the Systemic Side Effects of Overprescribing Goal Setting. And we'll put that in the link that goes out after this. And I guess what they're suggesting is that goals can do more harm than good, but they can also do damage to organisations and individuals using them. And so they talk about the bad side effects of goal setting, and they refer to things like a rise in unethical behaviour, a narrow focus that kind of neglects non-goal areas, distorted risk preferences. They talk about reduced intrinsic motivation. So I want to take a little bit of a closer look at some of the ways in which approaches to goal setting may not get the result that you're looking for. And again, this kind of links back to some of the things that we're learning from social cognitive neuroscience and other fields of neuroscience. So the first one of these is that often when we set a goal, we know that it focuses our attention, and that's obviously a good thing. The downside is that goals can focus our attention so narrowly that we actually overlook the important aspects of a task or a situation, which we saw in that Pinto example. And we know that our brain is an energy conserving organ. So when we direct our attention to something, that's where our energy goes. And this means that we can sometimes miss those opportunities that might lead to a better outcome. So that's the first challenge, that it can make our focus too narrow. The second one is it's very much, if you think about some of the traditional ways in which we approach goals, it's about measuring success and failure. So the specific and measurable goals, they provide a basis for evaluating whether you've met a goal or you haven't met a goal. But we saw in the Ford Pinto example that was met at huge cost, because in both lives and reputation. When people don't feel like they've met a goal, it can lead to feelings of failure, and obviously that can impact on people's feelings about themselves. The third one is around short-term versus long-term success. And I don't know about you, but I'm sure you've watched lots of the finance section on the news, and we see in the corporate sector there's lots of kind of focus on quarterly earnings and profit and shareholder return. And what we've seen is that it can lead companies to take really extreme measures to meet targets, even if this means sacrificing long-term growth. or fudging the books. So we know that can be a real problem. And what I've noticed in lots of companies that I've had the opportunity to work with is often from the top, when we see a dive in revenue, what happens is people then move into slash and burn mode. And typically you see the development budget gets slashed, but you might also see that the numbers of staff get cut. And this can be really detrimental. So, for example, if you think about the retail sector, for example, a loss of revenue, you cut staff, and then that impacts negatively on your sales conversion rates. So sometimes we can look at that short term and be very myopic in our thinking rather than looking at what are the long-term things that we need to be considering. The other challenge is around how goals can be, even though they're supposed to be motivating, they can actually be demotivating. And so we know that goals that emphasize immediate performance may prompt leaders, again, as I just mentioned, to kind of engage in that short-term behavior that can be challenging to the organization in the long run. A really interesting study, I don't know if you've heard of this, of a study of New York cab drivers. And they were questioning why is it really hard to get a cab in New York on a rainy day? So I don't know if any of you have been to New York and experienced that personally. And what they found was that most of the cab drivers, they set daily goals to basically earn double what it costs to rent out the cab for a 12-hour shift. And on rainy days, cabs make much more money and they tend to then go home earlier because they've met their goal. If New York cab drivers had a longer term horizon, they might decide to actually work longer, because obviously they're going to meet their goals and exceed their goals. So intuitively, stretch goals can make sense, yet we know they can have unintended consequences. And also we know the psychological consequence of stretch goals kind of can really be very detrimental to commitment. So if people don't feel like they're making progress, then they can check out of the workplace. The other thing I think it's really interesting to understand about goals is that they can stifle innovation. And, if we see goals and we move into a competitive kind of mindset, that can also impact negatively on cooperation. And when we're faced with challenging complex specific goals rather than do your best goals, we see that individuals are less likely to try alternative methods that could help them to learn how to perform a task. So I think that's really important to understand that, in fact, we need to be innovative right now. We're dealing with so much ambiguity. How do we make sure that we don't stifle innovation when we're setting goals? The other thing we know is that goals, too many, I don't know about you, but I've seen lists of KPIs that are just mind-boggling. And we know that too many goals can pose a real issue to individuals, because when individuals have too many goals or multiple goals, they tend to concentrate only on one goal. And because the brain is an energy conserving organ, we tend to focus and concentrate on the one that's easier to attain. So I think that's the other thing we need to be very mindful of, is not setting too many goals for people. Probably the last one I wanted to focus on, and for those that have been on webinars before, that we're very interested in the concept of psychological safety. When we're judged for failing, or when we move into that competitive rather than cooperative mindset, it can erode trust within teams. And this can negatively impact on psychological safety. And we've seen the evidence of the relationship between psychological safety and performance. So again, there's a lot of things that can go wrong when we're thinking about how we approach goal setting and how we measure performance. But I'm not trying to say don't set goals. That's not my intention. And the interesting goals goes right back to the time of Aristotle. And they've been of interest to psychologists and to social neuroscientists for some time. And each of them are trying to understand and answer a fundamental question, which is, why is goal setting, it's easy to kind of say, I've got this goal, but achieving it is way, way harder. There's a guy called Elliot Berkman, and he's been exploring the links between neuroscience of goals and behavior change. He does some really interesting work. And I like how he describes a goal as a desired outcome that wouldn't otherwise happen without some kind of intervention. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It's pretty basic. And his more formal definition of a goal is it's a desired future state or an end, coupled with a set of what he calls antecedent acts. So those are the things that need to happen that promote the attainment of that end state. So really the means. And in practice, he kind of suggests that we set goals in cases where we need to do something that hasn't happened yet and isn't likely to happen on its own. So if we don't set a goal, we're not going to be motivated to act and to try and pursue that goal. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the different types of goals. But just before I do that, I just want to see, are there any questions or comments in the chat pane so far, Penny?
It was actually more people are agreeing with you, and it was really interesting. There were half yeses and half noes to your earlier question. Dave suggested that focusing on short-term targets, returns for shareholders, help kill off regional newspapers, which is an interesting statement.
Yes, yeah. Oh, interesting to see. There's still half and half. So yeah, I'm hoping for those that are still using it, you might go away and do some thinking afterwards.
Ashnell, I hope I pronounced that properly for you, has suggested that SMART has disadvantage of going away from delivery of quality work as employees are rushed to meet timelines.
Absolutely. And again, it's that issue of too many targets and too many goals. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about the work of Jason Fox. So he's written a really cool book. I don't know if you can see this. It's called The Game Changer: How to Use the Science of Motivation with the Power of Game Design to Shift Behavior. Great book if you haven't read it. And I love the way he talks about goals. And he's kind of considered an expert in motivation. So he, as I mentioned earlier, has lots of issues with how we approach goals. And he suggests that we really need to broaden our understanding of how goals work. And he talks about 5 different types of goals. And I think it's really useful to be thinking about when you're setting goals, what are the kind of different types of goals that you need to set. And the first one he talks about is we need to have purpose-based goals. So this is really our big, fuzzy, giant vision goals. They're the most, what he would say is the most epic of all goal types. And as he kind of talks about, we're often happiest when we feel like we're contributing to something bigger than ourselves. And we saw this in Project Aristotle, that Google did, where they talked about impact being really important to people in terms of high performance. So Fox kind of suggests that too many leaders don't aim high enough, and we need to, and by keeping our goals so measurable, we actually then don't look at those lofty things that we're trying to achieve, or those really big picture things. So purpose-based goals aren't measurable; they're really higher level goals. The next one he talks about is quest-based goals, and I love this. Because he talks about goals as kind of you need to approach it a bit like playing games, video games. And so the quest-based goals are kind of nested within a bigger purpose, and it's kind of like we're on a quest to contribute to a higher level goal. And if you think about our kind of quest and mission at NeuroCapability, it's about changing the world one brain at a time. And so really you're trying to find new solutions that might help you to achieve that purpose that you talked about. The next one he talks about is mission-based goals, and these are more quantifiable goals with a fairly specific pathway. And the important thing about mission-based goals is that they can be reverse engineered, and they're easy to be measured, and you can break them down into little sequence groups of tasks, if you like. And he talks about the outcome of a mission is dualistic. So he says it's mission success or not yet mission success, which then means we might need to go back to the drawing board. But that's what I love about his approach to goals. It's kind of like, if you get stuck, then you don't just keep pushing through to meet that target. You actually stop and revise and have a look at what you're doing. And it may mean that you need to rethink things and do things in a different way, which is what allows that innovation and creativity to happen. The next one he talks about is about task-based goals. And these are really made up of very specific tasks. And this is important because we need a roadmap that helps us to look at how we're going to achieve those goals that we're setting for ourselves. And these are the ones that need to be a little bit more specific and measurable and very crisp and tickable. So, you know, when you do them, you can tick them off, and it feels really nice when we actually complete things. It gives us a hit of dopamine. I don't know if any of you use your to-do list, but it's really nice to check it off when you've actually achieved it. So the final kind of goal he talks about are automated goals, and these are the things that you really want to be able to do just without really thinking about them. So there's a bunch of things that we can do that will make our lives easier if we learn how to do them, so they become hardwired in our brains. I want to talk a little bit about timing. And I don't know about you, but I'm curious if people on the call are still doing, you know, are anyone still doing 5-10-year plans, or even 2, 3, 5-year plans? And I guess my question to you is, how well is that working in the current world that we operate within, where there's high levels of ambiguity, high levels of uncertainty, where things can change? Look at the pandemic. The pandemic, you know, came unexpectedly and completely changed, you know, how many of us were working. And I'm just thinking in relation to what I've just shared with you from Jason Fox's work, what would it be like if you could actually craft a 91-day mission around an improvement goal? And this is how we found that it works really well, is to actually have 91 days, and that's really kind of like 3 calendar months, where you set something, you go on a quest, on a mission to achieve something. And what I'd like you to think about is, there's something that you could improve in your workplace that you could share with your team and actually develop a 91-day action plan about how you're going to try and achieve that goal. So maybe, you know, I think it's still important to have longer term visions, but we know that it works well when the brain has a beginning and an end, and we have a plan in how we're going to get there. The other thing I think is really important to think about when you're framing up goals or KPIs is this idea of goal direction. And we know from the research that positive focused or reward focused goals are met much more consistently than punishment focused or threat based goals. So what would it be like if, instead of viewing goals as having a defined path and a clear direction, that we kind of saw them as giving us as a kind of like a journey or a pursuit, that we were heading towards something. And given that the research suggests that goals can inhibit learning, it may be more useful to set learning goals than performance goals. And I think that's really important in the context of performance improvement and performance management, where we, you know, we want to be setting goals that actually are about challenging people to try new things, to learn new things, to improve what they're doing. And in the constant changing business environment, perhaps learning goals should be the norm, as opposed to, you know, goals that we set. But, you know, really we're trying to look at positive focused, reward-based goals. I just want to talk briefly about goal pursuit through a neuroscience lens. So I love this idea of thinking about goals as a journey or pursuing goals. And Berkman and Lieberman in 2008, they suggest that psychological theory and neuroscience data really complement each other and can help generate insights for both fields in terms of, you know, how do we understand goals better? And they talk about 3 kind of common components to most models of goal pursuit. So this idea that we're pursuing something. And the first one is about goal representation. And really this is just about simply having a goal to pursue and holding it in memory. And again, it's important not to have too many, because if you have too many, you'll tend to work on the easiest one. So they talk about that as goal representation. The second is an intention to pursue a goal. And so really this is the motivating force that comes with holding a goal in memory and initiating that goal pursuit behavior. So it's an intention. It's kind of like, if I do, when X happens, I will do Y. So really it's your intention. And the third component is what they call goal action. And it's really, this is about, our attention, our motor control, inhibiting our responses. And it's what supports us to kind of shift and alter course when something in the environment also shifts. So those are the kind of 3 steps that they talk about in terms of goal pursuit. And I'm just going to pause for a moment and just see if there's any other questions or comments, because I'm going to talk next about, some of the alternatives to KPIs and how we can use the science to think about how we pursue goals in a different way. Any questions or comments, Penny?
Yeah, you've actually started something, I think, Linda. It's lots of comments. So from Jason, KPIs are often used as poor proxy for leadership. People mistake goal setting for leadership. Leadership is much more involved, much more human, and significantly more complex than KPI setting. What damage do you believe annual reviews and 360-degree reviews are doing to move to a more human-centered leadership model?
I think that's a really great comment and a really good question there. And I actually, I still find it really curious. I don't know about you, but I find it really curious that we're measuring individual performance and yet people work in teams. So we're doing, these 360s, the annual review. I mean, we know that from all of the research that performance management approaches that we're using right now often don't work. So why are we still using them? And, we really need to be thinking about different ways that we can be supporting people to adopt growth mindsets and to learn, but to also do what you were just what you referred to in that comment about bringing the human-centered approaches back into the work that we're doing. Any other comments or questions, Penny?
You've got a lot of comments, particularly around the 5-year plans. Quite a number of people are saying they don't do them and they've changed since the pandemic.
Yes.
Anshul has actually suggested, what about using the balanced scorecard to define the goals? Do we think to innovate other business metrics to set the goals?
I think one of the things that's really interesting about the balanced scorecard, so it was developed and it was intended to be read from bottom to top. So, people, customer, process, and then, revenue or results. Unfortunately, quite a lot of companies read it from the top down. If you have happy people, that influence and people that are socially and psychologically safe, that means that customer experience is better. If you have good processes and systems in place, then that supports both happy people and happy customers. And then that's where your revenue flows. So we've got to really be focusing on those things down the bottom. And I think it's useful to have some targets around people, around customers, some goals. What are our goals around our people? What are our goals around our customers? What are our goals around improving processes and systems? And then, ultimately, how are we going to measure success in that process?
Gillian has said, look way into the future, 100 years, how I would like the environment and business to look way into the future, then test decisions against this intention.
I love that. I think that's really, really consistent with the research around what's referred to as a benefit mindset. So we saw the wonderful work done by Carol Dweck talking about fixed and growth mindset. There has been additions to that thinking now about benefit mindset. So it's an extension of growth mindset. It still has the components of growth mindset, but the additional lens through which benefit mindset looks is how are we contributing to the greater good of society and the environment and the world. And I think that that's exactly where we need to be heading. We need to be thinking, about our footprint, about our impact. And I know this is one of the things that drives us in terms of our goals at NeuroCapability is we're constantly looking for maximum impact. We're trying to change the world one brain at a time. How can we leverage that? How can we find maximum impact so that we're touching as many people as we can with this information and making a difference in the world? Because we know that when people have a good experience at work, it influences their health, it influences their well-being, it influences their relationships with other people. And so we know that we want to make a difference in the world. So I think that benefit mindset is a really lovely thing to have a look at.
I have a really good one from Gordon, who says the 91-day goal must surely still want to feed in or be in line with the overall purpose of what we're looking to achieve over time.
Absolutely. So I think it's got to align with the purpose goal that, that Fox talks about, that overall purpose, what you're trying to achieve. I guess it just becomes more achievable from a brain perspective when we chunk it down and do it and look at shorter periods of time rather than setting out a big 5-year plan or a 2-year plan when things can shift and change so rapidly. Because once we commit to a plan, the brain loves that because it gives us it's very difficult to then alter course when we've made this commitment because it takes energy. You've already created the pathways in your brain around that path, and to shift and alter is more difficult. So I think, and the lovely thing about 91 days is it's just a 91-day process. You might meet your goal before that 91 days is up, and then you just adjust and you set a new goal. And I think in 91 days, we really shouldn't be looking at more than 1 or 2 goals at a time because all the research is there. If it's too overwhelming, we will pursue the easiest goal. So I think it's much better to kind of go, what's the most important thing? And how does each team in an organization, what are the areas that they need to be working on? What are the goals they need to achieve that actually link with the broader purpose?
Thank you, Linda. There's one more. A lot of people have made comments agreeing. Jody has said setting a strategy and helping people use their strengths to achieve the goals. I think it is the measurement that we need to make more brain friendly and have people determine how they are measured, determine their milestones so that they feel a sense of achievement when they reach a mini goal.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think we do need to be re-looking at how we measure things, how we measure performance, how we measure, like even bonuses and all. It really needs a rethink. I would absolutely.
Last but not least, sorry, they're keeping coming through, so we will get to you at the end. So I'll let you continue, Linda.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about an alternative to KPIs. I've personally always hated key performance indicators, and I started experimenting with changing the language around this some time ago. I mean, first, because I don't think it's very brain friendly. It's very judgment orientated, key performance indicators. And I think that often, as I've said before, that they can seem unattainable. And I've seen lots of evidence of people manipulating data to show that they've met them when they haven't. I was talking recently to a general manager who, took over from another general manager, and she was really exasperated with the whole performance management process they were using in their organisation. And she said, all of my people are ticking exceeding expectations for their key performance indicators for their role. And she said, I think that some of them are barely meeting them, let alone exceeding expectations. And she said, but I'm really wary of challenging this because for several years, this has been signed off by my predecessor as being, okay, and I don't want a whole bunch of people to go on stress leave. So I think it's really interesting, how are we setting KPIs for performance of individuals, and are we setting them up for failure? Are we setting ourselves up for failure? So I think that's one area we need to think about in terms of KPIs, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think the other kind of interesting thing about KPIs, and I don't know if you've kind of had this experience as well, but there's a ton of kind of KPIs that float around, and, you know, as I said earlier, we can have tons and tons of them. I've done quite a bit of work in the retail sector, and, you know, often the holy grail of KPIs is revenue. But that's a lag indicator, and really, to the person on the shop floor, they don't really care about revenue. You know, that's not going to, they get they get a wage, then it's not going to really make a big difference to them if they meet their revenue targets or not. And so what's interesting is that whilst the retail sector, you know, focuses on that stuff, there's a whole bunch of other KPIs that are much more important to be focusing attention on. And obviously the most important one is sales conversion rates, because that's really what influences revenue in a store by store kind of experience. And we did some work with a large retail chain, and there was this really big emphasis on revenue, and we sort of got them to look at what some of the other important KPIs were. We were also doing psychological safety assessments, team-based assessments, and linking them with KPIs. And what was kind of interesting is we sort of, in these stores, they got the same onboarding process, they got the same training, etc. And they had the same product that they were selling. And we saw really big differences in sales conversion rates, from 17%, I think was the lowest, right through to around 48% for the highest store. And when we were talking with the sales manager of this organisation, he was gung-ho once he saw the relationship between psychological safety and sales conversion rates. He really wanted to focus much more attention on sales conversion rates. But the interesting thing was, he said, okay, so let's set a target. Let's set a goal for everyone to get up to 48%. And we kind of went, oh, hang on a minute. That's probably not the best idea. And I said to him, look, if you set the 17%, they have to get up to 48%. That's just going to seem so unattainable. It's not going to motivate them to do anything. If you don't set a stretch target for the 48% people, then they're just going to keep doing what they're doing. But actually, they're your top performers, so you want them to keep doing well. And so I said, what would it be like instead if we set a smaller target? If we looked at, let's try and improve sales conversion rates in all stores by 3% or 2%, you know, it could even be 1%. And so, you know, luckily they trusted us and went ahead with that. And what was interesting is, you know, through some, obviously we did some education to support people to improve the customer experience, and also to support people to improve the customer experience. In a 91-day, and we worked in a 91-day block, in 91 days, they improved across the board their sales conversion rate by 14.8%. So it was a massive shift, but I don't think we would have seen that had the goal being, you know, everyone to get to 48%, because it just wasn't going to be achievable, and it wasn't going to be realistic either. So I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts on some different ways that we can language KPIs that I've tried and I think work, and I'd love for you to share your thoughts on this. So I call these KGSFIs, and if you think about the way in which we came up with these ideas was to look at, what is the science telling us? How do we approach KPIs in a different way, but also through a goal pursuit lens? And so there's three components to this, and I'll just go through those briefly in a moment. But the first one is key goal intention. So we call those KGIs. So this is our 91-day focus. What do we want to focus our attention on? And again, I would recommend pick one if you can, just one. The second component is key success indicators. You know, what will be the indicators of progress? And, you know, we know that it's really important for people to see that they're actually making progress towards the meeting of a goal. And the final one is key focus intentions. And we know the saying, where attention goes, energy flows. So we really want people to be able to focus their attention on something and for that to be an intention for that 91-day process. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of an example. If you think about key goal intentions, and I'll talk about it in kind of two contexts. The first one is around performance reviews. What would it be like if we could actually set learning goals, for people, and it's one thing that they decide collaboratively with you that they want to improve upon. And we were able to do this in the retail sector setting that I spoke about before in that example, where we worked with a couple of store managers. We looked at their psychological safety scores and we said, hey, if you want to improve sales conversion rates, there's a couple of things that you might want to focus attention on. And so we think about a behavior, one or two, that they could focus attention on. And that's what led to some of the success. So they had this goal of, I'm going to show appreciation to my people. I'm going to get better at showing appreciation to my people, was there an example of one. And then if you look at the next part of the process in terms of key success indicators, we need to look at the what will be the indicators of success, the things that you'll measure. And obviously in the retail it might be improved customer feedback scores or improved psychological safety scores for that particular manager I was talking about, increased fitting room conversion rate. So we do need to look at what are the metrics, what are the things that are going to be a sign of success for us, and document those. And then the final one is around key focus intentions. And this is what we need to look at every level in a business or an organisation, from the person on the shop floor right through to the people in head office. What do we need to focus our attention on for these 91 days to achieve our key goal intention? And this might include, if you think about that retail sector, really simple things like making sure we greet every customer as they come into the store and help them to find what they're looking for. There was a lot of emphasis in this retail chain on checking bags as people left the store to make sure they hadn't pinched stuff. And I kind of said to them, what if you flipped that resource allocation to greeting people as opposed to checking if they're stealing stuff? So they swapped it around, and that was again something that led to that improvement in sales conversion rates. So their focus intention for every member of staff was in store was to actually greet customers with a smile and make their experience a wonderful experience. And I think it's really important, even when you're looking at all of these, is to document it. Spend time collaboratively developing your key goal intentions, your key success indicators, and key focus intentions. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm curious, I'd love to hear your thoughts on alternatives to pursuing goals and to KPIs. If this is just some of the content that we share in our advanced Neuroscience of Leadership, and if we've got a May program, if you're interested, I'd love to see you join. And you can get information on our website. And this is also, as I mentioned before, we have a ton of free webinars on our blog section on our website. So I'm going to pause, I'm going to take a sip of water, and I'm going to turn to the chat pane and any questions or comments.
There is a lot of questions and a lot of comments. So you might just want to cast your eyes if you've got that in front of you. But Jason has said he agrees that measurements of success and performance will vary for different people within organisations, and each of those measurements combine to determine the success of the business. Don't know whether you've got that in front of you there, Linda?
I've got a really long list of comments.
Yeah, that's why it's important for every person in the organisation to understand how their contribution fits in the overall success.
Yeah, it's really important. And I saw, I think it was Origin Energy. They actually did a one-page diagram, like an infographic that showed where every part of the organisation contributed to their higher purpose. And I thought it was lovely. And that is really important. People need to feel connected into purpose and how what they're doing aligns with purpose.
Lots of people want to know whether they can get a copy of the webinar, so have suggested that it will be sent out to them, plus also on our NeuroCapability TV channel on YouTube.
Yes. So people will get a copy, and feel free to share that with other people, and invite them to other webinars if you found this one interesting. So it's nice to see that this has generated some thinking and some questions and some comments. I'm really pleased to see that. Any other ones that you think I should kind of respond to, Penny?
Look, a lot of people are agreeing with you. Gerald, for instance, the greatest danger for most of us is not what we set our goals too high and miss them, but set them too low and meet them, which is Michelangelo. I love that.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes, I think, yeah, we've got to find that balance, don't we? We really don't want to set too lofty goals, but we also don't want to set goals that we can't meet. And I think one of the interesting things about what we've learned in our measuring psychological safety through the PS25 conductor software, what we've noticed is that people can have levels of psychological safety, but they're still not performing. And so I think that's about people leaders not feeling comfortable holding people to account for the goals that we're setting as well. So I think there's another component in there around how do we hold people to account for the what people are saying they're going to do in a psychologically safe way, and how do we make sure that we're not setting targets too low. And that's why I like that idea of a target that doesn't have a percentage, like the example I gave in the webinar around, instead of saying everyone must get to 48% sales conversion rate, that we actually pick something that's achievable, but still stretches people to actually try and perform. And that's where, 3 to 5%, and obviously they exceeded it. So again, in the next 91 days, they could choose to focus on a different aspect of the business to improve it.
Eileen Duncan has said, when setting goals and planning, we can check in on how it will impact on the purpose using the PDCA cycle, which is a lovely cycle. Continuously reviewing performance and decisions renews the discussion and the outcomes. And then she goes further to say the danger of creating individual silos is not working together as a team, but somehow still achieving the team outcomes, so nothing's changed.
Yeah, and again, that silo stuff can happen when people are pursuing goals without actually looking at it in terms of the broader purpose or the broader context of how what they're doing is contributing to, the broader goals of the organisation, if you like.
Thank you. Jack has mentioned that he's not very clear on the difference between the key goals and key focus.
So key goals are the things that you're trying to improve. So for example, in the retail, it would be we're trying to improve sales conversion rates by 5% in 91 days. And then the key focus intentions is around how are we going to do that? So what are the areas that we're going to pay attention to? So we're going to really look at, and for example, what this organization did, and I thought they had some beautiful examples of how they were trying to improve that and the areas that they wanted to focus on. So they actually looked at people that were great at greeting customers in the store, and they improved. What they did is they gave them the status of being customer service ambassadors. And so they were the ones that did some in-store mentoring for people. So again, the focus intention is about, this is what we're trying to improve. This is the goal we're trying to reach. This is what we need to focus our attention on to take action and pursue that goal. So hopefully that helps explain it a little bit more. Thank you for asking that question. It's always good when people ask questions around things because I'm sure other people will benefit from it as well. Any other comments?
There's a lot of people with a lot of agreeing with you and that they've got to go, but I wonder if this is the opportunity for them to come off their mute and ask directly, do you think?
Oh, if there's any questions, I'd love to hear them. For those that are leaving us, thank you for joining us. For those that are listening into this recording, thank you for listening. And I look forward to you joining us in a webinar in the future. All right, anyone want to come off mute and have a chat? No? Lots of people.
Linda, hi, it's Di. I've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you were talking about that example in retail, the 91-day example around the sales conversion rates, and so I was then comparing that to the SMART style of developing goals. It still sounds like it fits that criteria. You know what I mean? Like it was a very specific goal. It was measurable, it was attainable, it was realistic, and it was time bound. So I guess I'm still struggling a bit to see what the difference is in that approach.
I think that if you think about that example that I gave, they did set a goal, and I think it's quite okay to set goals that have measures attached to them. I guess it's really about how do we make sure that when we're thinking about how we achieve those goals, that we see it as a pursuit, and rather than kind of getting stuck in just looking at how we achieve that goal. What is it that everyone in the organisation needs to be doing to support our attention staying on that? So one of the things I think with some of the dangers with SMART and what I've seen people do is they've become so focused on just the goal that they don't think about the pursuit process. How are we going to keep that in mind? How are we going to achieve that? And I think the other thing I've noticed with SMART is that when people go through that process, they then often come up with a whole pile of goals. I saw just recently someone's set of KPIs they developed using a SMART framework, and I just thought, this is just completely overwhelming. I don't know how this organisation is going to actually go, which bit do we do first? Because there were so many of them. And then again, I think what happens is people move to those earlier ones. So I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be measuring things. I guess what I'm saying is we need to be able to work with people on also contributing to their ideas in that process about how we pursue those goals. And part of the process that we did with that retail group is we brought 100 leaders into the room and we actually workshopped with them how they were going to do that stuff. It wasn't us going, this is what you need to do. It was, what do you think will work? What do people need to be focusing their attention on? And I think that that's a process that gets missed when SMART goals are developed by senior people in an organisation. This was 100 people, which included people that are in the shop floor, and we're able to give some really good ideas on what we could focus attention on.
Hi, Linda. I have a question for you. That was a great webinar. How about coaching people for performance? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think you can use what is, if we've done some, for example, the psych safety stuff, we can then work with leaders and say, hey, these are the things that you're not scoring very high on. Let's see if we can turn that into a key goal intention. So something that you want to focus, you want to put some effort and energy into. And let's look at, how, if you're going to focus on that, what are the behaviours that you'll need to engage in that will support you to achieve that learning goal? And what will be the signs of success for you? Like what will tell you that you're actually making progress towards pursuing that goal? Does that make sense? So I think it's going to be done much more collaboratively with people. And the other interesting thing I think is that and what I've seen in a lot of organizations is there's an obsession with developing capability frameworks. And I think the capability frameworks use some really important skills, I think, that we need in terms of leading psychologically safe teams. You know, we're starting to see evidence around situational humility being important, and yet we don't see that as a capability in many capability statements.
Absolutely.
So I think it goes back, you know, there's fundamental things that we need to shift and change in terms of our capability frameworks, but also to say, how do we work with people? And I think performance needs to be assessed on a team basis, not just an individual basis. We work in teams. And it just seems perplexing to me still that we're just focusing, we have this obsession with individual assessment. And everyone hates the process. I haven't heard many people say the process.
Absolutely, because currently we are facing challenge with two large companies. One is going for the traditional, insisting that this is much better. And the one is saying, we are willing to change, but we're not sure we're going to get there. So this is the kind of thoughts people have when you want to change something. After 40 years, people have been using SMART goals, and suddenly we said, things have changed, times have changed, we need to change with it. Yeah. So the dilemma leaders are facing these days.
Yeah, and I think it's a big shift. If you've been using something and that's the way we've always done things around here, you know, it's a simple equation. The simple equation is the reward of change greater than the threat of change to equal action. And so that's what they're dealing with. They're kind of going, oh, it's going to take a lot of thinking and energy to come up with a new way of doing this. Let's just keep doing it the way we've always done it. There's a biological push to keep doing it the way we've always done it. And yeah, that's the challenge that companies face. But I guess, you know, as more evidence emerges around different ways of doing things, and they see companies having success with those different ways, then that's where the shifts, you know, there'll always be your early adopters, those companies that are a little bit ahead of their time, and then there'll be the late adopters that take a while to be convinced that it's worth the effort to change.
Absolutely. But internally, we are moving towards the growth mindset. We don't use the carrot and stick method anymore. And it's
really
very well. Very well. We can see the difference in behaviors of people, the output as well. So we are very much growth mindset, output focused, and rewards.
Fantastic. Yeah. And you might want to look at the benefit mindset stuff.
Yes.
Because that just extends even further.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that.
People don't resist change. They resist being changed.
Yes. Yes.
I have a question, because one of the ways I help people to set goals is an overall intention or goal, and then obviously some sort of time on it. Defining that goal, and this is working with people. And then the last column is the barriers to achieving that goal.
Yes.
Then the next drop down is, how can we counter those barriers? And again, so on and so forth. Is that a reasonable approach?
Yeah, look, I love that, and I do use that process with people of talking about what are the things that could get in the way of you achieving this, and how can we guard against that, or how can we mitigate the chance of that happening. So I think that's brilliant, because it also gets people to future forecast and scenario plan, and notice when those things are coming in a little bit more, because it kind of directs our focus to that. So that's brilliant. I really like that idea.
If just on another area of change or not change, if you think SMART is a long time in 40 years, have a look at the sales process, which is still based on that which was enunciated in 1878. In other words, I have to compete with the buyers, I have to handle objections, I have to close. It's so antiquated. It was good at the time because selling was seen as a competition. Now, selling in its purest sense, because we all sell, is seen as a cooperation. So there's a long time to change the sales mindset.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there, and you know, we need to be leveraging and looking at what we're the research that's emerging from neuroeconomics, from social cognitive neuroscience, and even from you know, affective psychology. And yes, it does challenge some of the things, those long held beliefs that we've held on to for many years. And I think that's a really good thing. I love how it's challenging it and getting us to think differently. We're at the end of our time. I'd like to thank those people that stayed on for doing that. And please join us for a webinar in the future, and have a wonderful day, everyone.